Tutorial on taking a hype file, making it into a .html5 file, and then importing that into Xcode 6.2 to make it into an iOS app that you could sell in the Apple iTunes App Store. So the first thing we want to do is look at our hype file. This is a very simple one. I have two scenes, a start scene and a play scene. And what this little application is supposed to do is demonstrate some of Hype Pro 3.0's physics engine, as well as just some of its button actions moving from scene to scene. First thing I always do with my hype file before I export it is I preview it in the browser just to make sure that everything's working the way I want it to. So my button, my start button, I go ahead and click, and my drag actions you can see are working. And what I'm going to try to do here is get the ball, in the bucket. It works. The replay button works. Everything's fine the way I would like it to be. So I go ahead and close up the browser and then come back into Hype. And then I go to Export as HTML5 and I slide over to Folder. You are going to get a lot of warnings in here about Internet Explorer and Opera. You don't need to concern yourself with those because we're making an iOS app. So they don't matter at this point. So go ahead and click Export. And I'm going to overwrite. I had already created this file earlier, but I'm going to overwrite this template.html file there. So we have a template.html file, and you want to make sure you save it as .html file. Have that checked. Also, I'm having show built with Hype because I think it's kind of cool that I can design, animate, and add the JavaScript in Hype and then just drop it in a few simple steps over to Xcode. You do not need to create an enclosing folder, and since it's not a web page, you do not need to include text contents for search engines. I'll go ahead and save it. I'm replacing my old one, so I'm overwriting it. Now I will go ahead, I'm just going to hide my Hype window for the moment. I don't need it open. And then I'm going to go ahead and open up Xcode. First thing you want to do is go up to File, New, if you already have Xcode open. If you open it from scratch, it will guide you through the process of creating an app, and you'll see that here in a second. So I go to File, New, and then I go to Project, because I'm creating a new project. Come up to the second window, and it tells you the kinds that you want to create. I'm going to do a single view application. Click Next. And then the product name, I'm going to call this Paddleball. You would have your name for your company, if that's, or just yourself. Your identifier is usually the URL for your own website. And we're going to write this in Objective-C. You can do it in Swift. We're going to do it in Objective-C today. Swift will be another tutorial. And we're going to do it for the iPhone because, as you remember from our Hype document, we designed it vertically for an iPhone. Universal, if we had designed it with both the types of layouts that Hype provides you, you could make it so that it would play on an iPad and iPhone and look great on both devices. For right now, we're going to do iPhone. And you do not need to use core data. Click Next. I created a folder called Template App. You can put it out there. And if you see what it does, it creates the folder inside the Xcode project and all the pieces that you'll need, the delegates and everything in there to make your app. Close that folder up. We'll come back over here to Xcode itself. Let's take a look at it. Over here we have the project navigator, and this is where all the pieces and parts are that make up your app. You have your app delegates, your view controllers, your storyboards, your supporting files, usually where you're going to put your audio and your images, things like that. And so think of it as a directory services for Xcode. Over here, you could think in terms of this as it's a file inspector, almost like the file inspector or element inspector in Hype. So if you have an element, you'll find all the particulars about it over here. Down here, this is a really specialized section of the file inspector. It's the template library where you can get objects. And we're going to be down here getting our web view object here in a second. First thing you want to do, though, is focus on the supporting files folder. And what we want to do is import our Hype document that we created, our Hype HTML file, that is. And we want to take that and copy it, drag it over to supporting files folder. That'll bring up a window that's going to ask you to do a couple things. Make sure the destination is checked, copy items if needed. Added folders, create folder reference, make sure that's checked. Add to targets, compatible, yes. Finish. And it goes in there. Sometimes it does get a little buggy in Xcode, and if you drag it over, you may not get it in the folder, and it'll sit outside. It has to be in the folder. So I just flip the lever back and make sure it's in there. Yes, it is. Then I'm going to come back over in the Hype Resources folder. When Hype exports out an HTML file from Hype, it creates this great folder that houses all of your JavaScript, your images, things that you need. And this is basically the guts of the Hype application that you made. So you're going to take that folder and you're also going to bring it over to supporting files. And you want to make sure the same things are checked. And finish it. So now the template HTML file and the Hype Resources folder are in there, and you can take a look at them. So that's the HTML, and then the Resources folder has everything in there if you were to open that up. So we can close that down, supporting files. Now we're going to concentrate on the view controllers. Think of a view controller as the screen of your iPhone. It's a window, but it allows touch actions. It shows animation, graphics. That's essentially what a view controller is. There's more technical explanations, but that's pretty much a layman's way of looking at view controllers. First thing we're going to do is look at the view controller H. It's a two-part process. And you can see when you open it up, it's pretty sparse. It just says, hey, this is an interface. It's a view controller. Great. Now what we want to do, though, is we want to make sure that our Hype document can be shown in it. As it stands right now, it could not. So I'm going to go over to a file that I made earlier and copy the text from the code that I need to make this a little quicker for you. The line that we're going to bring over for the viewController.h is this line right here. And what this does, we're going to click and paste it underneath the add interface. So in a way, it's saying your interface is a view controller. The property of that view controller we are changing to be a web view. And we're going to connect it using something called an IB outlet that I'll show you in a second. So Objective-C is neat because you can think of Objective-C as the way you describe a thing. So view controller is a web view controller. Fairly straightforward. Now we're going to work on the second half of the view controller, the view controller M. And you can see when we open it up, here it is. It says the implementation view controller, how it's going to load whatever is in there, how it's going to clean out anything that it doesn't need that'll take up memory, and it ends. And it says that's the end of that method. So what we'll do is we'll come over here, and we're in the one that I created earlier, and we're going to copy over some text that's going to basically describe this view controller with more detail. So I'm going to copy all this text here, and I'll explain it when I bring it over. And do copy, and I go right here after the semicolon. It's going to get rid of the comment, so I don't need that comment. You could even delete it if you want. And then paste. And then what I have now is some more descriptive text about this view controller. So I'm saying there's a path that I want to follow. I want to go over and I want to find my HTML file that I put in. This right here is the string or text in a quote, and that is inside the supporting files. That is our template.html. So the view controller M, we want to make sure this in here in the quotes is the same as this right there. And then of type HTML, that HTML is there. You don't want to change that. That tells you the type of file. Then basically what we've got is a way to make it fit within the window and the size of the view controller. And we're going to set up the size of the view controller in a second. And then the web view, this set bounces, keeps it from jittering, especially when you're doing rotation. It's a nice little line of code to help it out. And then everything else stayed the same. So now we want to go into basically the view controller, the screen of your iPhone. You can see it doesn't look like an iPhone, it's square. Xcode 6 does this so that you can do more universal apps, and you can set it up, but we can still customize it to only fit the iPhone, and we'll just do a couple little things here that you'll see. The first thing we want to do though is this is the view controller. If you click on these buttons up here, it tells you the different parts of it, and this is a view controller that we've been working with the M and the H. But now what we want to do is we want to add a UI web controller or web view. So the best way to do it is come down here to the search box inside the object menu, the file template menu. We'll type in UI web, and there's UI web view. So there's a user interface web view, and it tells you what it is. If you hover over it, it's pretty self-explanatory. Done. I can then drag it over to my view controller, and you can see it moves around within that window. It looks cropped off, whatever. If I center it, you would think, great, I'm going to be able to see this as soon as I run my simulator, but really we have to customize this UI web view to fit the layout of the hype.html file that we created. So what I want to do is I want to click on that UI web view to select it and make sure it's selected. I'll come up here to the inspector, and that's the size inspector. I want to make sure 0 and 0 for the X and Y coordinates, so it's centered. And then the size of the iPhone 6 is 375 pixels width by 667 pixels high. So I go ahead and I get that, and it makes it the portrait size of the iPhone. Then I want to make sure that the X and the Y are still at 0 coordinates. So it should be centered within there. Now I want to go ahead, again, make sure you select your UI web view. Click on the view controller button so that we are up here in the view controller. And then what you want to do is you want to come over here to show the connections inspector, this little circle with the arrow in it. Click on that, and then what we want to do is we're going to make the web view part of the view controller. We're going to marry them together so that they're working together. What you do is you have this little button over here. You want to click on that, hold your option key down, and drag it, the web view, to the UI web view. And now you can see that they're connected. It adds it up here to the outlet. So we have a view controller, it's going to be a web view controller, and it's all connected. Now the next thing that you're going to want to do is the fun part. We want to go back and we want to build the file for the simulator. If you have your iOS device plugged into your Mac, it's really neat because you can actually view it on the actual device. But again, you'll have to set up provisioning profiles for your device. But for right now, we're just going to do this in the simulator. So I'll go to iPhone 6, make sure that's selected. And then I'm going to hit the build and then run the current scheme. So let's cross our fingers. Build succeeded. You can see the iOS simulators there. Takes a little time to load. Paddleball, which is our main screen loading. And there it is. It shows up in what the iPhone will look like. We'll test it to make sure it works. Click on the button. There it goes. Oh, does the replay work? Yes, it does. And I'm going to try to do a little better. Oh, the ball's jumped out again. Sorry, but I got to do this again because I want to make sure it works. And I'm sure it does. And move it over. And there it goes. And that's pretty much it. What you want to do too is you always want to quit out of your simulator when you're done because the iOS simulator is a little buggy. And if you keep it running, sometimes you won't be able to do other things. So that's basically the step. Those are the steps. I'm sorry. Those are the steps to get your hype document, turn it into a hype.html file, and import it into Xcode 6. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope it helps you out. while you're making your own apps. Thank you.